The sound didn't fade. It grew, not fast, not frantic, just heavier, each step landing with a weight that didn't match anything human. The corridor lights trembled with every impact, not flickering, but reacting like the structure recognized what was coming. The woman didn't move. That's not the same kind of entity. The three vertical bars on the wall brightened, pulsing in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Not a warning, not a signal, a summons. The steps got closer, no scraping, no dragging, just solid, controlled impacts that made the floor vibrate like the city was bracing itself. The woman's jaw tightened. It's answering the mark. The corridor ahead darkened, not because the lights failed, but because something massive blocked them. A shape filled the far end of the hall, too wide for the space, too tall for the ceiling, but the city didn't resist it. The walls shifted to make room. The woman took one step back. The shape kept coming. No face, no lines, no mimicry, just a towering mass of dense, shifting material that moved with purpose, not curiosity. Every step was exact, like it had been given coordinates and nothing else. The woman's voice dropped. This one doesn't evaluate, it executes. The entity stopped just inside the light, not revealing itself, not hiding, just standing there, a silent, immovable presence waiting for the city's next instruction. The bars on the wall flared. The entity reacted. It turned its head, or the part of it that resembled one, directly toward them. No sound, no warning, just a single, brutal fact. This one wasn't called to observe them. It was called to deal with them. The entity didn't wait for the bars to dim. It moved, one step, heavy enough to make the floor plates shift under its weight. Not cracking, not buckling, just adjusting, like the city was making sure nothing slowed it down. The woman held her ground. The entity's surface shifted as it approached. Not forming a face, not forming lines, just tightening, compressing, condensing into a shape built for one purpose. The woman's voice was low. This one doesn't communicate. The entity stopped 3 paces from them, close enough to feel the air pressure change, close enough to see the material of its body flex with each micro adjustment, close enough to understand it wasn't thinking, it was processing. The bars on the wall pulsed once. The entity reacted instantly. Its upper section split open, not like a mouth, not like a wound, but like a compartment unlocking. Inside, there was no light, no machinery, just a dense, shifting darkness that moved with intention. The woman didn't blink. That's its function chamber. The entity leaned forward, not to threaten, not to intimidate, just to confirm. A single, sharp vibration hit the floor, a signal from the city. The entity's chamber tightened. The woman exhaled once, steady. It's been given its directive. The entity straightened, the chamber sealed, and then it lifted one massive arm, not to strike, not to reach, but to point directly at the corridor behind them. The message was brutal and unmistakable. They weren't its target, but something behind them was. And the entity was about to clear the path. The entity didn't hesitate. The moment it finished pointing, its entire upper mass locked into place, a rigid, brutal alignment like a weapon bracing for discharge. The woman turned her head just enough to see the corridor behind them. Empty, silent, but the city had marked it for a reason. The entity stepped forward, one impact, heavy enough to make the floor shift again. Not cracking, yielding, like the structure wanted to get out of its way. The woman didn't move. The entity raised its arm higher, the surface tightening until the material looked like it was straining against itself. No blow, no energy build-up, just raw, compressed force waiting for release. Then it struck, not with speed, with finality. Its arm came down in a single, brutal motion, straight into the floor of the corridor behind them. The impact didn't explode. It didn't echo. It collapsed. The floor buckled inward like the city had been waiting for that exact strike. The material folded, sank, and vanished into a vertical drop that hadn't existed a second earlier. A new shaft, a new route, a forced opening. The woman stared into the void. That wasn't an attack. That was an extraction point. The entity didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her, didn't care. It stepped aside, one clean shift of its massive body, leaving the newly opened shaft exposed. The message was brutal and unmistakable. Something is supposed to come up from there, and the entity's job was to make sure nothing stopped it. The woman exhaled once, steady. Whatever's next, it's coming from below. The shaft vibrated. Once, then again. Something was rising. The vibration in the shaft didn't stop. It intensified. Not like something climbing, like something forcing its way upward, pushing the structure aside because it didn't care what was in its way. The woman stepped to the edge. The darkness below wasn't empty. It was moving, a dense, shifting mass pressing against the walls, reshaping him as it rose. The executioner entity didn't react. It stood perfectly still, its job already done. The woman's voice was flat. This one isn't being guided. It's breaking through. The shaft walls bulged outward. Once, twice, then split. A surge of black material erupted upward, not liquid, not solid, something in between, folding and unfolding as it climbed. It didn't reach for them. It didn't lash out. It claimed space. The woman backed up fast. The mass hit the corridor floor and spread outward in a controlled wave, stopping exactly at her feet. Not touching her, not testing her, just marking the boundary. Then it rose. A column of shifting darkness pulling itself upright, forming a shape with no symmetry, no logic, no attempt at mimicry. It wasn't trying to look like anything. It was just becoming. The woman stared up at it. This one doesn't evaluate. It doesn't execute. It replaces. The column tightened. A single, jagged line tore across its surface. Not an eye, not a mouth, just a violent mark that appeared with purpose. The floor vibrated again. The executioner stepped back. Not out of fear, out of protocol. The new entity had taken control of the space. And it wasn't waiting for instructions. It was starting. The new entity didn't pause. The moment it finished rising, its entire surface contracted, a violent, inward pull like it was compressing itself into something denser, sharper, more deliberate. The woman braced herself. The entity struck the floor. Not with a limb, not with a weapon, with its entire mass, dropping a single, brutal impact that made the corridor plates snap downward like they were made of thin plastic. The shockwave didn't spread outward. It spread down, straight into the shaft it came from. The woman's eyes widened. It's sealing its own entry point. The floor around the shaft folded inward, locking into a solid, seamless surface. No trace of the opening. No trace of the path it used. The city didn't repair it. The entity erased it. The executioner stepped back again, further this time, giving the new entity full control of the space. The woman swallowed hard. This one doesn't follow orders. It enforces outcomes. The entity turned toward her. Not slowly, not threateningly, just a clean, decisive rotation of its entire upper mass, like it had selected her as the next variable to address. A jagged line tore across its surface, deeper, longer, more violent than before. The woman didn't move. The entity leaned forward, not to attack, not to communicate, to assess whether she needed to be removed. The air pressure dropped. The corridor lights dimmed. The executioner didn't intervene. This was the new entity's domain now, and it had just made its first decision. The entity didn't give her time to breathe. The jagged line across its surface tightened, pulling itself into a sharper, more violent shape. The air pressure dropped again, harder this time, like the corridor was bracing for impact. The woman didn't move. The entity moved first, not toward her, not away, just a single, brutal shift of its entire mass to the left, a recalibration that made the floor plates groan under the weight. Then it struck, not her, the wall beside her. Its mass slammed into the surface with a force that didn't explode outward. It collapsed inward, the material folding like it had been waiting for that exact hit. A deep cavity formed instantly, clean and precise. The woman flinched. That wasn't a miss. The entity pulled back. The cavity in the wall wasn't random. It wasn't damage. It was a slot, a perfectly shaped recess, as if the entity had carved out a space the city needed opened. The executioner stepped back again, giving the new entity full control. The woman stared at the cavity. That's not an attack. That's an access point. The entity turned toward her again. The jagged line across its surface widened, not like a mouth, not like an expression, but like a warning marker. The air pressure dropped a third time. Harder, heavier, final. The entity leaned forward, not to strike, not to communicate, to confirm she understood. She wasn't the target, but she was in the way. The corridor lights dimmed. The cavity in the wall began to glow. Something inside it was activating. And the entity had just cleared the path for whatever that was. The cavity in the wall didn't glow softly. It ignited. A harsh, white-hot strip of light snapped on inside the recess, cutting through the corridor like a blade. The new entity didn't flinch. It leaned toward it, the jagged line across its surface tightening into something sharper, more violent. The woman stepped back. The light inside the cavity pulsed once, a brutal, strobing flash that made the entire corridor shudder. The executioner entity didn't move. It simply lowered its head, acknowledging the shift in authority. The woman's voice was low. It's not opening a door. It's powering something. The cavity widened. Not like a hatch. Not like a panel. Like the wall was being peeled back from the inside, forced open by something that didn't care about the structure it was tearing through. A shape pushed forward. Not rising. Not climbing. Just forcing its way into the corridor with a slow, crushing inevitability. The woman froze. The shape wasn't a creature. Not yet. It was a frame, a rigid, angular structure of dark material, unfolding piece by piece like a machine assembling itself mid-birth. The new entity stepped aside. Not respectfully, not cautiously, because this thing outranked it. The frame locked into place with a sound that wasn't mechanical, it was structural, like the corridor itself was being rewritten to accommodate it. The woman exhaled sharply. This one isn't alive. The frame shifted. A second layer slid into place. then a third, then a fourth, each one heavier, denser, more deliberate than the last. The corridor lights dimmed again. The frame tightened, and then it looked at her. Not with eyes, not with lines, with orientation, the entire structure pivoting toward her like she was the only variable left to process. The new entity stepped back further. The executioner lowered its stance. The frame took its first breath, a deep, grinding intake of air that didn't sound like breathing at all. The woman whispered, "Oh, this one's built to replace us." The frame leaned forward, and episode 25 moved into its next phase. The frame didn't finish assembling. It snapped into place, a violent, metallic lock-in that echoed down the corridor like the city had just installed something permanent. The woman flinched at the sound, not because it was loud, but because it was final. The frame straightened, not smoothly, not naturally, just a brutal, mechanical jerk upward, like it had been yanked into alignment by an invisible force. The executioner entity lowered its stance again, not in fear, in submission. The woman's voice was barely audible. "This one outranks everything." The frame rotated its upper section toward her, not turning a head, not forming a face, just orienting, a full-body pivot that made the corridor lights flicker from the shift in air pressure. Then it inhaled, not breath, not air, it pulled in light. The glow from the cavity dimmed as the frame absorbed it, the white strip fading until the corridor was lit only by the emergency strips along the floor. The woman stepped back. The frame's surface tightened, the layers compressing until the entire structure looked like it was bracing for something violent. Then it exhaled, a single, concussive blast of force, silent, but heavy enough to shove the air forward in a wave that hit her chest like a physical strike. She staggered but didn't fall. The executioner didn't move. The new entity didn't acknowledge her. It was calibrating. The jagged line across its surface flared, a harsh, angular mark that pulsed once, twice, then locked into a fixed shape. The woman swallowed hard. That's not a warning. That's a designation. The frame leaned forward, not to attack, not to communicate, to begin. Whatever this thing was built for, it had just entered its operational state. And she was standing in the middle of its first assignment. The frame didn't wait. The moment its designation mark locked into place, its entire structure shifted, a brutal, mechanical reconfiguration that made the corridor plates tremble like they were being warned. The woman didn't move. The frame extended one arm, not a limb, a segment, a rigid, angular piece of its body that unfolded with a sharp, metallic snap. The air pressure dropped again, harder than before, like the corridor was being pulled toward it. The executioner entity stepped back another pace. The woman's voice was tight. It's initializing. The frame slammed its segment into the floor. No sound, no shockwave, just a clean, surgical impact that made the material beneath it retract, not break, not collapse, but pull away like the city was obeying a higher command. A new pattern appeared on the floor. Not a symbol, not a mark, a grid, perfectly aligned, perfectly spaced, perfectly intentional. The woman stared. That's not for navigation, that's for replacement. The grid lit up. A harsh, white-blue glow shot through the lines, spreading outward in a controlled burst that stopped exactly at her feet. The frame didn't look at her. It didn't need to. It had already decided she wasn't part of the pattern. The executioner lowered its stance again, acknowledging the shift. The frame leaned forward, its entire upper mass compressed, tightening into a dense, angular shape that radiated pressure like a physical force. The grid brightened under it, responding to every micro-movement. The woman exhaled once. It's rewriting the corridor. The frame snapped upright. The grid pulsed, and the floor beneath them began to change, not slowly, not subtly, but with a violent, structural shift that made it clear. This wasn't an attack. This was the beginning of a replacement cycle, and she was standing inside it. The grid didn't just glow. It activated. A violent surge of white-blue light shot through every line at once, not spreading outward but downward, like the floor was being hollowed out from beneath them. The woman staggered as the plates under her boots vibrated hard enough to rattle her bones. The frame didn't move. It stood perfectly still, its entire structure locked in place, like the cycle needed its mass as an anchor. The executioner entity backed away another step. Not out of fear, out of protocol. The woman's voice was tight. It's starting the override. The grid pulsed again. This time the floor responded. The plates didn't shift. They retracted, sliding apart in clean, geometric sections that exposed a second layer beneath them. Not machinery, not wiring. A new surface. Smooth, dark, unfinished. The corridor wasn't being repaired. It was being replaced. The woman stepped back fast. The new surface rose, a slow, grinding ascent that pushed the old floor upward like it was nothing more than a temporary covering. The plates buckled, folded, and vanished into the walls as the new layer took their place. The frame leaned forward. Its jagged designation mark flared again, brighter, sharper, like it was syncing with the cycle. The woman exhaled. This isn't construction, it's conversion. The new floor locked into place with a deep, structural thud. The The grid vanished, the light died, and the corridor was no longer the corridor. It was something else, something built for whatever the frame was about to do next. The frame straightened, the executioner lowered its stance. The woman realized the truth. The cycle wasn't changing the city, it was preparing it, and she was standing in the middle of the preparation zone. The new floor didn't settle, it responded. The moment it locked into place, a deep, mechanical thud rolled through the corridor, not from the frame, not from the executioner, but from beneath her. The woman froze as the surface under her boots tightened, the material contracting like it was adjusting to her weight. Then it moved, not downward, not sideways. It shifted around her, forming a tight outline of her stance, a perfect silhouette pressed into the surface like the floor was taking her measurement. The woman's breath caught. It's mapping me. The frame leaned forward. The jagged designation mark across its surface pulsed once, a sharp, violent flash that synced with the floor. The outline beneath her feet brightened, glowing with the same white-blue light as the grid before it. The executioner stepped back again. The woman didn't. The floor tightened. The outline around her feet locked, sealing her position with a sudden, brutal clamp of pressure that held her in place without crushing her, not restraint, not mercy. Calibration. The woman's voice was low. It's deciding if I belong in the new structure. The frame straightened. The floor responded instantly. A second outline formed, this one around her legs, rising from the surface like a mole being cast around her. Smooth, precise, unavoidable. The woman tensed. This isn't a scan. The outline rose higher. Knees, thighs, hips. The material didn't touch her skin. It didn't need to. It was building around her, shaping the corridor to accommodate her presence, or erase it. The frame's jagged mark flared again. The outline stopped rising. The corridor went silent. Then the floor spoke, not with sound, but with a single, brutal shift of pressure that made the truth unmistakable. The cycle had reached its verdict, and she was either going to be integrated or removed. The floor tightened around her legs again, not squeezing, not restraining, just claiming the space she occupied, like the corridor was deciding whether she deserved to stand there at all. The frame didn't move. It watched her, not with eyes, not with intention, but with orientation, its entire structure angled toward her like she was a problem it had been assigned to solve. The new floor pulsed once. A deep, heavy thud rolled through the corridor, shaking dust from the ceiling. The executioner entity stepped back another pace, lowering its stance in a way that made it clear. This wasn't its domain anymore. The woman's breath hitched. The outline around her hips rose another inch, the material forming a perfect mold of her silhouette. Not touching her, not harming her, just measuring her. The frame leaned forward. The jagged mark across its surface flared, a violent, angular pulse that synced with the floor beneath her. The corridor lights dimmed, leaving only the glow of the new surface illuminating her from below. The pressure shifted, not on her body, on the space she occupied. The corridor was evaluating her existence. The woman whispered, "Just decide." The frame straightened. The floor responded instantly. A single, brutal pulse of force shot upward, not enough to lift her, not enough to knock her down, but enough to make her bones vibrate with the truth. The cycle had chosen, and whatever it decided she was, the corridor was about to enforce it.